The 2008 life simulation game, Spore. I think we can all agree that since this game's emergence, humanity has peaked. There is no new invention, no innovative piece of technology that could possibly top the sheer beauty, the immaculate performance, the true perfection of Spore. It's hard not to get carried away with Spore, swept up in its immersive worlds. With so much power at your fingertips, it's easy to make mistakes and alright, I may have made a big one. So I made this creature called the Ducktator, and I thought it was pretty funny at the time. I gave him a cute little hat and a monocle, and then I forgot about him and moved on to some other save files, and essentially I'm now in a situation where the Ducktator has raised a massive evil army and is waging war across my entire game. Cue the dramatic music. The Ducktator stood up on high, orchestrating a choir of guttural screams chanted by the beasts around him. Whelks, poachers, ducks, and the French. Each regiment of monsters was more frightening than the last. What can elephants do against such reckless hate? Wondered small Paul, who stood shuddering atop the keep of the vast stone fortress Helm's Toot. This castle would be his only salvation. Its walls were thick and impenetrable, apart from a massive archway in the middle, which he'd instructed his friend the Leviathan to just plug up with a huge barrel. Hopefully that'd do the trick. A giant whale, a handful of frogs, and a tribe of sentient burgers had gathered to his aid. But it was not enough. As a dreadful silence fell over the battlefield, he knew the end was near. They were the universe's final hope, and yet they would soon be absolutely wrecked and murked and stunted on by a duck with a monocle, with what could only be described as the most terrifying quack they'd ever heard. The Ducktator signalled his forces to charge, and the final battle had begun. Marauding across the ground at some speed, it was no time before claws clashed against webbed hands and feet. And though you wouldn't expect a frog-based infantry to be particularly effective, they met the Ducktator's armada with equal force. The wall of green held strong, and, strategically backed up by a burger taser unit, they were able to whittle the enemy down through a series of electric shocks. The Allied forces' sniper, Dimitri, headed round the back, picking off the larger threats one by one with his rifle. His main targets were these mutated tomato creatures which had disproportionately large thighs. He had been chased by them once before and knew just how devastating they could be. So, mounting the walls and using it as a springboard, Dimitri splattered tomato juice across the grass with a series of impressive 360 trick shots. Although, I don't know, does this classify as a 360? I've never really thought of Spore as an esport, so I'm not sure what the rules are. His companion, a crab named Mr. Pinchy, was keen to get in on the action, but crabs have very poor attention spans, and Mr. Pinchy was already bored with this whole war and conflict business and decided to leave in search of more entertainment. Despite one of their best fighters going for a mid-battle stroll, in a shocking turn of events, the Allies were actually doing quite well. They had reduced the opposition to a smattering of soldiers, who all seemed to be currently engaged in a collective PTSD flashback. War never changes. Is this all you can conjure, Ducktator? Tooted small Paul, rather arrogantly assuming they'd nip the whole destruction of the universe thing in the bud. But he had spoken far too soon, as, with a clap of thunder, two more galactic portals split the sky, and the Ducktator's real forces arrived. It was an army that was supposed to be extinct, but by reaching his dark, shadowy wing back through time, the Ducktator had resurrected the might of the Whelk Zone. A wave of shells flooded the battlefield, swamping whatever frogs remained under an endless carpet of vicious mollusks. But this riptide contained not only run-of-the-mill sea snails, some of these bad boys were giant and mounted with cannons. These were foes that only a fellow monster could deal with. The Leviathan knew her duty. "You shall not pass," she shouted, quoting her favourite movie. She would not allow them beyond that barrel. With 4 against 1, the stakes were hardly in her favour. The Whelks fired round after round from the plasma cannons mounted to their scaly hides. all she could do was flop about in a sort of weird humping motion. It was an unconventional fighting stance, that's for sure. However, the Leviathan still had a trick up her flipper. There was a reason they wrote myths and legends about her, and to everyone's surprise, she suddenly began to get smaller. How was that supposed to help against a troop of giant whelks? But, in conserving her power, she could unleash an incredible ability. Sending an exhale of icy cold breath from her jaws, she froze one of the whelks completely solid. The Arctic seas in which she lived were a cold and unforgiving place, so while she was over there she swallowed a load of ice and kept it in her mouth for times of need. With this, she was able to expel a kind of frosty solution, which turned her enemies one by one into ice cubes. With a little bit of rinse and repeat, she would be well on her way to victory. Meanwhile, the smaller whelk army had cleared the field, and were advancing on the castle walls. They formed ranks and attempted to scale the walkway. Their numbers were too many. Dmitri feared the worst, but the cannons division had other ideas. Under the confident command of their captain Colin, they sent volley after volley down the cobbles. The whelks tried to break through with their fiery breath and gnashing teeth, but a bombardment of epic proportions stopped them in their tracks. The cannons division was steadfast, and so the whelks sought another way to breach the fortress. Making a U-turn, they rushed in their masses towards the archway, and, with the Leviathan otherwise engaged, they had a free run at the giant barrel. The whelks cascaded into it, forcing it to do all sorts of weird, glitchy maneuvers. Thankfully, it was far too big and heavy to squeeze underneath, and the cannons division were able to mop up any strays that did manage to worm their way into the keep. Ever the military tactician, the Ducktator made a strategic decision to utilize his giant toad and giant mushroom. The toad assumed the role of a battering ram, flopping himself against the barrel with the aim of splitting it into pieces. This was bad news. If they made it through that archway, they could surround the main tower from behind, and the fight would be as good as over. Who could challenge such a massive toad? Dmitri, the burghers, and especially Small Paul would be crushed underfoot in a millisecond. Just as defeat seemed certain, however, salvation appeared on the horizon. It was the soup dragons. They had come after all. What a morale boost. Even just staring into their massive cartoony eyes, you could sense the unlimited wisdom and ancient power. And they demonstrated this immediately, performing a series of combination moves by vaulting off one another's backs to attack from above. The teamwork was impeccable. It was like watching the Power Rangers, but with more culinary expertise. With a couple of wombo combos, the toad and mushroom were down, and the dragons assumed defensive positions in front of the giant barrel. They set about holding back the ocean of whelks at their feet, just booting them as far as possible like a bunch of footballs. With these three around, Small Paul felt they could hold out forever, but whoa, hold on, no, the blue soup dragon doesn't appear to be doing so well, and what, no, their health bars were disappearing at an alarming rate. So this was the true extent of the Ducktator's forces, so powerful they could take down even living gods? I'm fed up of whelks, man, I swear down. Literally the worst creature in existence. That title, however, would soon be up for debate, as the evil tyrant called forth yet more of his dark minions. And this time, oh dear, it was Giant Napoleon with his French armada. And even worse, standing next to him was Eren Yeager. Oh, it was over. I've seen Attack on Titan, there's no way we're defeating this guy. The two colossal men stomped across the battlefield, leaving great craters in their wake. This was it then. Small Paul was all out of trump cards. Mr. Pinchy had abandoned him. Dmitri was buried under a heap of mustache-twirling Frenchmen. The Leviathan was still chipping away at those pesky giant whelks, not realizing that soon the main tower behind her would be surrounded. Paul and whoever remained would be trapped, and all the good in this world would be extinguished in one fell swoop. If he could have had but one final wish, it would have been to see the love of his life Stinky again. Considering the situation, however, he hoped instead she was far, far away, living out the rest of her days at the edge of space. What was it she'd said to him again? Look for me at first light on the second-ish day. Well, that would be sort of around now. Well, there was a sight for sore eyes. It couldn't be. The legendary crew assembled once again. Fruitius Maximus, Barnaby Bear, Peter the Penguin, Mr. Fish Fingers, and oh look, that's where Mr. Pinchy went. That makes more sense now. Like a contrived piece of plot armor or a poorly written twist, Stinky the Elephant had come through at just the right time. Although arguably if they'd arrived a bit earlier there would have been considerably less bloodshed, but they were here now nonetheless. And with a great charge and a trumpet of her snout, they stormed down the hill with triumphant flair. Plums, bananas, mountain goats, and a massive yeti at their side. Even Eren Yeager would have to tremble in fear, although is the yeti running away already? What the hell, come back, we literally need you. Thankfully he was just getting an extra run up, and Napoleon and the Jägermeister stood no chance. With that, the heroes did what they did best. Peter the Penguin exhibiting his expert pirate swordplay, Fruitius Maximus zipping around on his new jetpack, which was ineffective but looked pretty cool, and Barnaby Bear slicing up his foes with his Wolverine claws. I'll be honest, Barnaby Bear did do most of the work, like the guy probably could have taken out the entire army on his own, but victory was at hand, and with one final jet-powered boost, Fruitius set his sights on the Ducktator himself, landing on his rocky platform and then immediately falling off and running out of fuel. Luckily, Peter the Penguin had managed to stay up there and finished him off in a rather unceremonious one-on-one. And that's how the battle ended. Their leader no more, the forces of evil were outgunned, and they retreated at speed to whatever dark, decrepit corner of the universe they had come from, hopefully never to be seen again. Because of his exploits, Peter the Penguin was named the new King of the Realm, which was a decision he was just as surprised about as everybody else. Considering there weren't many trustworthy creatures left in total, they all went along with it anyway. Peter's first order as king was that he wanted to have a go at surfing on top of the Leviathan, so he and the giant whale left the ceremony early. And after all the celebrations, more than anything, Stinky and Paul were just glad to be reunited again. As the two of them trotted off into the distance, cheerful and content, I stepped away from my computer screen and finally felt it was time. Time that I closed my antivirus software and my Windows Task Manager tabs and quit Spore, secure in the knowledge that I had done what I set out to do. I, the world's greatest scientist, had found true power. Because sure, I never completed the game properly even one single time, like I didn't even bother with Space Stage once. But I recreated the Battle of Helm's Deep in Spore, like I've completed the game.